The doctor's voice echoed through my mind like shattered glass. You never had bipolar disorder, Miss James. The tremors, the mood swings, it was Lyme disease all along. 10 years, 3,650 days of my life stolen by a misdiagnosis, by pills that poisoned instead of healed, by a label that turned me into someone even my own family couldn't recognize. Hi there. Thank you for joining me. What city are you from? I'd love to know. Now, here's what happened to me. I stood in the parking lot of Henderson Medical Center, my hands shaking so violently that my car keys slipped through my fingers and clattered onto the asphalt. The late afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders, but I couldn't feel its warmth. My body had gone numb, cold from the inside out. I bent down to retrieve the keys, my knees cracking, my 54-year-old joints protesting every movement. How many of these aches had been real? How many had been side effects from medication I never needed? The fluorescent lights of the medical building behind me hummed with indifference. I turned back to look at the glass doors, at the sterile building where I'd just learned that a decade of psychiatric treatment had been completely unnecessary. My fingers found the door handle of my Honda, pulled it open. The interior smelled of stale coffee and the lavender air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror last month. I collapsed into the driver's seat, my chest heaving with breaths that wouldn't quite fill my lungs. My phone vibrated in my purse. I dug through the collection of prescription bottles I apparently didn't need anymore, and found it wedged beneath my wallet. The screen displayed a text from my sister Keisha. Mom's asking about Sunday dinner. You coming? My mother. The woman who'd stopped inviting me to family gatherings after I'd had that episode at Christmas 7 years ago. The one where the medication had made me hallucinate, where I'd screamed at relatives who weren't even there. The tremors in my hands intensified. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel instead, my knuckles turning pale against my brown skin. The medical file sat on the seat beside my phone, crisp manila folder containing the evidence of institutional failure. Inside those pages, lab results showed elevated inflammatory markers, positive tests for Borrelia burgdorferi, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. The specialist had explained how the infection could mimic psychiatric symptoms, how my original doctor had missed the bullseye rash because I'm dark-skinned, how the blood tests from 10 years ago had been the wrong kind, too early to detect the antibodies. I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 4:47 p.m. Rush hour traffic would be building on Interstate 77, but I didn't care. I needed to move, needed to drive, needed to do something with the rage building in my chest, like a pressure cooker about to explode. My foot pressed the accelerator, and the Honda lurched forward out of the parking space. I merged onto the highway, cutting through 3 lanes of traffic with sharp jerks of the steering wheel. Horns blared behind me. My hands ached from how tightly I gripped the wheel, the tendons standing out like cables under my skin. The medical file slid off the seat, spilling papers across the floor mat. 10 years of my life reduced to incomprehensible medical jargon scattered at my feet. The Honda's engine whined as I pushed it to 75, then 80. Buildings blurred past, concrete and glass monuments to a world that had kept spinning while I'd rotted in psychiatric wards. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. I'd missed my daughter's graduation from nursing school because I'd been committed, involuntarily. They'd strapped me to a bed and pumped me full of antipsychotics that made my tongue swell and my mind fog over like dirty water. A blue sedan drifted into my lane. I slammed the horn, holding it down for 5 full seconds. The other driver swerved back, and I saw her mouth form words through her window. Angry words, probably justified. I didn't care. My chest heaved with each breath, ribs expanding against my scrubs like they might crack through the fabric. The exit for Providence Road appeared. I yanked the wheel right, tires squealing as I took the curve too fast. The Honda tilted, suspension groaning. My phone bounced off the seat and onto the floor, the screen lighting up with another text. Probably Keisha again. My sister who'd believed the doctors when they said I was delusional, who'd signed the papers to have me evaluated, who'd chosen their expertise over my desperate pleas. I pulled into a shopping center parking lot and killed the engine. My hands shook so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs. The steering wheel still held the heat from my grip. Through the windshield, I watched people walk in and out of a grocery store, carrying bags, pushing carts, living their ordinary lives. A man helped an elderly woman load her trunk. A teenage boy rode past on a skateboard, headphones covering his ears. I bent down and gathered the scattered papers from the floor. The pages felt smooth and official under my fingertips. Lab reports, imaging results, the specialist's summary. One page showed test results from 10 years ago, with a notation in red ink. Repeat test recommended if symptoms persist. That recommendation had never been followed. Instead, Dr. Calloway had written me prescriptions for Risperdal, then Zyprexa when that stopped working, then clozapine when the hallucinations intensified. My phone screen showed 3 missed calls now. I picked it up, unlocked it with trembling fingers. Keisha's contact photo stared back at me, both of us at a cookout, before everything fell apart. I looked normal in that picture, happy. My hair was styled, my smile genuine. The woman in that photo had no idea what was coming. I opened my contacts and scrolled past Keisha's name, past my daughter Maya's number, past the psychiatric clinic where I'd spent every Thursday for a decade. My finger hovered over a number I'd saved 2 months ago during a moment of hope I couldn't even remember feeling now. Attorney Russell Chen specializes in medical malpractice, free consultation. The numbers blurred as tears finally came, hot and fast, down my cheeks. I wiped them away with the back of my hand, leaving wet streaks across my face. My body folded forward until my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. The horn gave a short beep. I jerked back up, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. An empty parking space stared back at me. I pressed the call button before I could second-guess myself. The phone rang 3 times. 4. My stomach twisted tighter with each electronic trill. On the 5th ring, a woman's voice answered. Professional, clipped, efficient. Chen and Associates. How may I direct your call? I need to speak with Attorney Russell about a medical malpractice case. The receptionist put me on hold. Elevator music floated through the speaker, a tinny instrumental that made my temples throb. I rolled down the window halfway, letting cold air rush into the car. It stung my face, dried the tear tracks on my cheeks. The parking lot stretched out before me, endless rows of white lines on gray asphalt. A shopping cart sat abandoned 3 spaces over, one wheel pointing skyward. A man's voice replaced the music. This is Russell Chen. I understand you're calling about a potential malpractice situation? My mouth opened, closed. The words stuck somewhere in my throat like jagged glass. I forced them out. 10 years. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia 10 years ago. But I have Lyme disease. Neurological Lyme. The blood tests, they were positive the whole time. Papers rustled on his end. A keyboard clicked. Who was your treating physician? Dr. Marcus Webb, at Riverside Psychiatric Associates. More clicking. The sound drilled into my ears. I pressed my palm against the side of my head, fingers tangling in my hair. A headache was building behind my eyes, the familiar pressure that had been my constant companion for a decade. "Can you come to my office tomorrow at 2?" Chen asked. "Bring all your medical records, everything from the original diagnosis forward. Lab results, prescription history, hospitalization records if applicable. Do you have those documents?" I looked at the manila envelope on the passenger seat. "Yes." "Good. Write down this address." I fumbled in the glove compartment for a pen, found one buried under old napkins and insurance cards. My hand shook so badly I could barely grip it. I scrawled the address on the back of a gas station receipt, the numbers barely legible. When I hung up, silence crashed over me like a physical weight. The drive home passed in fragments. Red lights, stop signs. The familiar turn onto Oakwood Avenue where I'd lived for 15 years. My apartment building rose ahead, tan brick and brown trim, 4th-floor corner unit. The stairs felt steeper than usual. My legs trembled by the second landing. I gripped the metal railing, knuckles white, hauling myself upward one step at a time. My neighbor Gerald stood outside his door, wrestling with grocery bags. He glanced up as I approached, then quickly looked away. The same reaction I'd seen 1,000 times. The subtle shift in posture, the averted eyes, the sudden intense focus on something else. Anything else. He fumbled with his keys and disappeared inside before I reached my door. I unlocked my apartment and stepped into the dim interior. The curtains were still drawn from this morning. Dirty dishes filled the sink. Laundry overflowed from a basket near the couch. The air smelled stale, like old coffee and unwashed bedding. I'd been living like this for months, ever since the medication adjustments started failing completely. The envelope went on the kitchen table. I stared at it while filling a glass with water from the tap. The liquid was cold against my palm, condensation forming on the outside of the glass. I drank it in 3 long gulps, my throat working mechanically. The refrigerator hummed. The upstairs neighbor's footsteps thudded across their floor. My daughter's last text message still sat unanswered on my phone. "Mom, please call me back. I'm worried." That was from 3 days ago. Before that, a week of increasingly desperate messages. Before that, months of careful distance, the kind that forms when someone you love becomes unrecognizable. I opened my laptop and typed "neurological Lyme disease" into the search bar. Results flooded the screen: articles, medical journals, support groups, patient testimonials describing symptoms identical to mine: the hallucinations, the paranoia, the cognitive decline, all treatable, all reversible with proper antibiotics and supportive care. My fingers moved across the keyboard, clicking through page after page. Photographs showed brain scans with characteristic patterns of inflammation. Case studies detailed recovery timelines. One woman's story stood out. She'd been institutionalized for 8 years before correct diagnosis. Within 18 months of treatment, she'd regained most of her cognitive function. She had her life back. I slammed the laptop shut. The chair scraped against the linoleum as I shoved back from the table. My hands were shaking. Not the medication tremor I'd grown accustomed to, but something rawer, angrier. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Dr. Patterson's office number. My thumb hovered over the call button for 3 seconds before I pressed it. The receptionist's voice came through tinny and detached. I told her I needed to speak with the doctor immediately. She asked if this was an emergency. I said yes, though my voice came out flat, drained of inflection. She put me on hold. Muzak filtered through the speaker, some sanitized version of a song I once knew the words to. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I paced the kitchen, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. The walls felt closer than they had an hour ago, pressing in with their yellowed paint and water-stained corners. This apartment had been my cage for a decade. Every pill I'd swallowed here, every lost memory, every conversation with people who weren't real. The line clicked. Dr. Patterson's voice, smooth and clinical, asked what he could do for me. "I know what I have," I said. "It's not schizophrenia. It never was." Silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, the soft rustle of papers on his desk. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window above the sink. A woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed and gaunt, aging faster than the calendar allowed. He asked me to come to his office to discuss this. His tone hadn't changed. Still, that measured professional distance he'd maintained through hundreds of appointments. I told him about the tick bite, about the test results he'd dismissed, about the Lyme disease eating through my nervous system while he pumped me full of antipsychotics that did nothing but dull the edges. "Dawn, I understand you're upset, but..." I hung up. The phone clattered onto the counter. My chest heaved with breaths that couldn't quite fill my lungs. The kitchen swam in my vision, edges blurring like ink in water. I gripped the counter's edge, knuckles going white against the chipped laminate. The medical records. I needed the complete file, not just the discharge summaries they'd given me over the years. I grabbed my keys and wallet, shoving them into my jacket pockets. My fingers found the pepper spray on my keychain, a gift from my daughter, back when I could still be trusted to leave the apartment alone. The weight of it felt reassuring, solid proof of existing in the real world. The hallway outside my apartment stretched longer than it should, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I moved quickly past my neighbors' doors, each one identical except for the numbers. 3B, 3C, 3D. My footsteps echoed in the stairwell as I descended, one hand trailing along the painted concrete wall for balance. Outside, the afternoon sun hit me like a physical force. I'd barely left the apartment in 3 weeks, maybe 4. Time had a way of collapsing in on itself when every day looked the same. I squinted against the brightness, my eyes watering. The parking lot shimmered with heat, asphalt soft and sticky under my shoes. My car sat in its assigned spot, dust coating the windshield. I climbed in and started the engine. It coughed twice before catching. The AC wheezed out hot air that gradually cooled as I pulled onto the main road. Traffic flowed around me, other drivers going about their ordinary days, unaware that mine had just split into before and after. The medical center loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings. I'd been admitted to the psychiatric wing 3 times over the past decade. Ward 7, 4th floor. The memories came back sharp and bitter. Restraints, sedatives, therapy sessions where I insisted something was physically wrong, while doctors nodded and adjusted dosages. I parked in the visitor lot and walked through the main entrance. The lobby's air conditioning raised goosebumps on my arms. People moved past me, some in scrubs, others in street clothes, everyone purposeful and directed. I approached the information desk, where a young woman with a name tag reading Crystal looked up expectantly. "Medical records," I said. "I need to request my complete file." She directed me to the 3rd floor, East Wing. I took the elevator, watching the numbers climb. My reflection in the polished doors showed someone determined, jaw set, shoulders squared. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The medical records department stretched before me, a maze of cubicles and filing cabinets. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow. A heavy-set woman with graying hair sat behind the counter, her fingers flying across a keyboard. She didn't look up until I cleared my throat. "I need my complete medical file," I said. Everything from the past 10 years? Her fingers stopped. She peered at me over rectangular glasses, eyes narrowing as she assessed whether I'd be trouble. I held her gaze without blinking. Something in my expression made her nod slowly. ID and signature. I slid my driver's license across the counter. She photocopied it, then pushed a clipboard toward me with forms attached. My hand shook as I signed my name on 3 different lines. The pen felt heavy, like I was signing away something more than just authorization. "Takes 72 hours for the full file," she said. "I'll wait." I planted my feet and crossed my arms. She looked at me again, this time registering the determination in my stance. Her mouth formed a thin line. She swiveled in her chair and disappeared into the back rooms. I could hear her speaking to someone, voices muffled through walls. Minutes ticked by. My pulse hammered in my ears. When she returned, a man followed her. He wore a white coat over khakis, his badge identifying him as Dr. Vincent Corey, medical director. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and he carried himself with the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Ms. James?" He didn't extend his hand. "There's a proper protocol for requesting records." "Then follow it," I said. "But I'm not leaving without my file." His jaw tightened. We stood there, sizing each other up like boxers before a match. Behind him, the records clerk shifted nervously, her chair creaking. Dr. Corey's eyes held a warning. This wasn't how things worked, and I was crossing a line. I stepped closer to the counter. My fingernails dug into my palms. 10 years of my life reduced to paper files somewhere in these rooms. 10 years of being told I was broken in ways I wasn't. "You admitted me to Ward 7. I said, voice low but clear. 3 separate occasions. Administered antipsychotics for psychotic episodes that never existed. Every physical symptom I reported, you documented as delusion." His face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched beneath his left eye. "Patient care decisions are made based on comprehensive evaluations. I had a brain tumor." The words came out hard and sharp. "Stage 2 meningioma, pressing on my frontal lobe, causing every symptom you dismissed as mental illness." The records clerk gasped softly. Dr. Corey's expression finally shifted, a flicker of something that might have been concern or might have been calculation. He turned to the woman behind the desk. "Pull the file, complete psychiatric and medical history." She rolled her chair to a computer terminal, fingers moving rapidly. I watched the screen's glow reflect off her glasses. Dr. Corey stood rigid beside me, neither of us speaking. The silence stretched taut between us. "Here," the clerk said, voice barely above a whisper. "Dr." Corey leaned over her shoulder, reading the screen. I watched his face carefully. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles whitening. Whatever he saw there confirmed everything I'd said. "My office," he said. "Now." He walked away without checking if I followed. I did, trailing him through corridors that twisted back into the administrative section. His office was spacious, dominated by a heavy wooden desk covered in folders and medical journals. Framed degrees lined one wall: Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency. Credentials that should have meant expertise, but had somehow missed what was killing me. He closed the door and moved to his desk, yanking open a drawer. He pulled out a bottle of scotch and a glass, poured 3 fingers, and downed it in one swallow. His hand trembled as he set the glass down. "I reviewed your intake assessments," he said finally. "All 3 admissions." I remained standing, refusing the chair he gestured toward. My body vibrated with barely controlled rage, every muscle coiled tight, ready to strike. You reported headaches, vision changes, balance problems. He counted them off on his fingers. We ordered an MRI after your first admission. Which showed nothing, I said. The tumor was too small then. He poured another drink but didn't lift it. By the third admission, your symptoms had progressed. Paranoid ideation, we called it. Persecution complex. I told you something was wrong in my head. You agreed. You just thought it was psychiatric. He flinched like I'd slapped him. The scotch sat untouched, amber liquid catching the light from his desk lamp. Outside his window, the city sprawled below us, indifferent to the reckoning happening in this room. The scans should have been repeated, he said quietly. But they weren't. His silence confirmed everything. I moved closer to his desk, my shadow falling across the scattered papers. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but of what this meant. Malpractice, negligence, a decade of a woman's life stolen by assumptions. I placed both hands flat on his desk, leaning forward. My face was inches from his. I want every doctor who treated me in that file, every nurse who administered those medications, every therapist who documented my delusional complaints. I want names. He reached for a folder without breaking eye contact, slid it across the desk toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. The names swam before my eyes, 17 in total. My fingers traced down the list, stopping at each one, memorizing them. Dr. Marcus Webb, Nurse Patricia Huang, Dr. Kenneth Voss, Therapist Linda Carmichael. Each name burned itself into my memory like a brand. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. The camera flash illuminated Richard's face in harsh white bursts. He sat perfectly still, watching me document his failure, his department's failure. The phone felt hot in my palm, the evidence heavy despite its digital weightlessness. The hospital board meets in 2 weeks, he said. I lowered the phone. My jaw clenched so hard my molars ached. I'm not waiting 2 weeks. Dawn, please. You don't get to ask me for patience. I grabbed the folder, tucked it under my arm. The papers crinkled against my ribs as I moved toward the door. 10 years, Richard. I don't have 2 weeks to give you. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I was already at the door, my hand on the cold brass handle, when his voice stopped me. They'll destroy you in court. The hospital has resources you can't imagine. I turned, the folder pressed against my side like a shield. Then they better start imagining what I can do with this. The elevator ride down felt endless. 43 floors, each one marking a descent back into the world I'd been absent from. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors. Gaunt, hollow-eyed. A ghost wearing my face. I touched my temple, where the incision scar still itched beneath my hair. The lobby was empty at this hour. My footsteps echoed across marble floors, each sound sharp and definitive. Outside, the November air hit my face like a slap. I breathed it in, felt it burn my lungs, welcomed the pain because it meant I was alive, awake, real. My car sat 3 blocks away. I walked fast, the folder clutched tight against my chest. Streetlights cast long shadows that stretched and twisted with each step. A homeless man huddled in a doorway watched me pass. I wondered if he saw what I felt, that barely contained fury that made my skin feel too tight, my bones too rigid. Inside the car, I locked the doors and sat in darkness. My hands trembled as I opened the folder again. The dome light cast harsh shadows across the pages. Dr. Marcus Webb's signature appeared 14 times. 14 separate occasions where he'd documented my psychiatric decline. 14 times he'd prescribed medications that dulled my mind while the tumor grew. I drove to the hospital without thinking, muscle memory guiding me through streets I'd traveled countless times during my treatment years. The parking garage was half empty. I pulled into a spot on the 4th level and cut the engine. Silence pressed in around me. The tumor had been removed 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks of knowing that everything I'd experienced, the medications that turned my thoughts to sludge, the therapy sessions where I was told my physical symptoms were manifestations of mental illness, the pitying looks from family members who thought I was losing my mind. All of it unnecessary. All of it wrong. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the contact I'd been avoiding. My sister Teresa. The phone rang 4 times before her voicemail picked up. Her cheerful voice made my throat tighten. "It's me," I said after the beep. "I need you to meet me tomorrow. Bring your lawyer friend, the one who handles medical cases. I'll text you the address." I ended the call and sat with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. The plastic was cool against my skin. My breathing came faster now, shallow and quick. The panic attacks had started after the diagnosis, after learning the truth. The psychiatrists would have called them anxiety. They would have been wrong about that too. The hospital entrance glowed beyond the concrete pillars. I could see figures moving past the glass doors, nurses changing shifts, doctors making rounds, patients being wheeled to rooms where they'd be poked and scanned and diagnosed. I wondered how many of them were being failed right now, how many charts were being misread, how many symptoms dismissed. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Please don't do anything rash. Let me help fix this the right way." I deleted it without responding. There was no right way to fix 10 years. No way to give back the time I'd lost, the career that had crumbled, the relationships that had fractured under the weight of my mental illness. My fingers flew across the screen, composing a new message to the medical board, attaching the photos I'd taken. Before I could send it, another text appeared. Unknown number. My stomach dropped as I read it. "This is Nurse Patricia Huang. Dr. Elwood told me you'd be reaching out. I need to talk to you about what really happened during your admissions. Not over phone. Meet me?" The coffee shop Patricia had chosen sat 3 blocks from the hospital, a cramped space wedged between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation office. I pushed through the door 40 minutes early, needing to control at least one variable in this situation. The bell chimed overhead, too cheerful for what was coming. My hands trembled as I ordered black coffee from a teenager who couldn't have been more than 17. The ceramic mug burned against my palms when she handed it over. I took the corner booth where I could watch both entrances. The vinyl seat cracked beneath me, releasing decades of embedded smells: burnt coffee, cleaning solution, someone's vanilla perfume. My phone sat face up on the scarred table, the screen dark except for occasional flashes when emails arrived. More messages from Richard. One from my sister asking if I was okay. I ignored them all. The coffee tasted like charcoal, but I drank it anyway, needing something to do with my hands. My left knee bounced under the table, a nervous habit that had developed during the lithium years when sitting still became impossible. The medication had made everything worse. The tremors, the weight gain, the fog that settled over my thoughts like heavy gauze. But the doctors had insisted the symptoms proved I needed it, a circular logic that had trapped me for years. A woman entered at exactly 3 o'clock. Short, maybe 5'2", with black hair pulled back so tightly it stretched her features. She wore scrubs under a long coat, the fabric wrinkled like she'd pulled a double shift. Her eyes found mine immediately. No hesitation. She'd been looking at my file photo, probably memorizing my face the same way I'd memorized the hospital layout. Patricia slid into the booth across from me without ordering anything. Up close, I could see the exhaustion carved into her features, dark crescents under her eyes, lines bracketing her mouth that spoke of too many years witnessing things that couldn't be unseen. She placed a manila envelope on the table between us, but kept her hand on top of it. "You look different than your photos," she said. "Healthier." 10 years off the wrong medications will do that. Her jaw tightened. She glanced over her shoulder at the counter, where the teenage barista was absorbed in her phone. The shop was nearly empty. Just an elderly man by the window reading a newspaper, and a woman in business attire typing furiously on a laptop near the bathroom. Patricia's fingers drummed against the envelope, a rhythm that matched my still bouncing knee. "I need assurances before I show you this," she said. "My name stays out of any legal proceedings. I have a daughter in college. I can't afford to lose my pension." "What's in there?" She pulled the envelope closer to her chest. "Insurance. For both of us." "But I need your word." I leaned forward, close enough to smell the antiseptic that clung to her clothes. "You stood by while they pumped me full of antipsychotics for a condition I didn't have, while they locked me in observation rooms, while they documented every episode that was really just me begging someone to run proper tests. You want assurances?" Patricia's face drained of color, but she didn't look away. "I pushed for the neurology consult 3 times. Dr. Elwood overruled me every time. Said you were displaying classic bipolar features with psychotic elements, that the tremors were medication adjustment issues, that your insistence on the medical cause was a symptom itself. Anosognosia, lack of insight into your own condition." My coffee mug cracked under the pressure of my grip. A hairline fracture appeared, spiderwebbing up the side. Hot liquid seeped onto my fingers, but I didn't let go. "How long have you known the truth?" 2 years. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I found your old intake blood work in archived files during a random audit. The ammonia levels were flagged, but never followed up on. Someone had initialed it as reviewed, but there were no orders for additional testing. I started pulling records after that. You weren't the first patient Dr. Elwood misdiagnosed as psychiatric when the underlying cause was metabolic." The shop tilted sideways. I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the sticky residue of spilled sugar and old coffee. My vision narrowed to the envelope under Patricia's hand, everything else blurring at the edges. "How many others?" "At least 4 that I found. Could be more in older records that were digitized poorly." She pushed the envelope across the table. "This one is from 6 months ago. Young man, 23. Came in with aggressive behavior, paranoia. Dr. Elwood diagnosed him with schizophrenia, started him on antipsychotics immediately. The patient died 3 weeks later from complications of Wilson's disease. Copper buildup in his organs. Could have been treated if they'd caught it early." My hands shook so violently I couldn't open the envelope. The teenager behind the counter looked up at the sound of papers rustling, then went back to her phone. The overhead lights seemed too bright suddenly, boring into my skull with the same intensity as the fluorescent bars in those hospital rooms where I'd been strapped to beds, where orderlies held me down while nurses administered injections I'd begged them not to give me. "The family knows?" "They settled. Non-disclosure agreement. The hospital paid them enough to make the lawsuit disappear." Patricia's voice carried an edge of bitterness that surprised me. "Standard procedure. Cheaper than admitting systematic negligence." I finally got the envelope open. Inside were photocopied medical records, pages of lab results with values circled in red, a death certificate, and photographs, A young man with dark skin and dreadlocks, smiling in what looked like a graduation photo. Then, hospital photos, the progression of his decline captured in clinical detail. The yellow tint to his eyes in the last image made my stomach lurch. His name was Marcus. Strict first person only, no she, her, Dawn in narration. I yanked the car door open so hard the metal hinges groaned. My purse hit the passenger seat and spilled its contents. The manila envelopes sliding across the leather. Marcus's graduation photo staring up at me from where it landed, face up near the gear shift. The key scratched against the ignition twice before I got it in, hands still trembling from the coffee shop confrontation. The hospital rose ahead like a fortress of glass and concrete, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun in blinding squares of white light. I'd driven this route hundreds of times over the past decade, each appointment another brick in the wall they'd built around my life. But now, the wall had cracks. The parking garage swallowed my car into its concrete belly. I grabbed the envelopes and shoved them into my bag, leaving Marcus's photo on the seat where his eyes couldn't follow me. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor of the main entrance. The antiseptic smell hit immediately. That particular blend of bleach and industrial cleaner that had soaked into my clothes, my hair, my skin during those long hospitalizations. The elevator carried me up to the 7th floor. Psychiatry. The doors opened onto beige walls decorated with abstract prints meant to be calming. A woman in scrubs walked past carrying a medication cart, its wheels clicking rhythmically. She didn't look up. Dr. Elwood's office sat at the end of the corridor. His name gleamed on a brass plate beside the door. Robert Elwood, M.D., Ph.D., Chief of Psychiatry. I'd sat across from him in that office 63 times. I'd counted them all, written them in the margins of journals I'd filled during the years when writing was the only thing that proved I still existed. My fist connected with the door 3 times, harder than necessary. The sound echoed down the empty hallway. "Come in." I twisted the handle and stepped inside. He sat behind his massive desk, silver hair perfectly styled, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied something on his computer screen. The office smelled like leather and old books. Diplomas covered the wall behind him in ornate frames. Harvard, Johns Hopkins, a dozen certificates of achievement and awards. A shrine to his brilliance. He glanced up, and recognition flickered across his face before settling into professional concern. "Dawn, you don't have an appointment today." "Is everything?" I threw the first envelope onto his desk. Papers scattered across the polished wood surface, sliding over his keyboard and knocking over a pen holder. Marcus's medical records landed face up, the death certificate on top. "Wilson's disease." My voice came out steady despite the fire in my chest. "You diagnosed him with schizophrenia, started him on antipsychotics that destroyed his liver when what he actually needed was copper chelation therapy." Dr. Elwood's face went rigid. He picked up the death certificate, examined it, then set it down carefully. His fingers straightened the edges of the papers, creating neat stacks. "I'm not sure where you obtained these confidential medical records, but..." The second envelope hit the desk. A teenage girl's photo spilled out, followed by pages of lab work showing thyroid levels that should have been caught in any basic screening. 15 years old, you said she had bipolar disorder. It was Graves' disease. His chair scraped back as he stood. "This is completely inappropriate. These are sealed files. You have no right. I have every right." The words exploded out of me. I slammed both palms on his desk, leaning forward until I could see my reflection in his glasses. "You stole 10 years of my life. You diagnosed me with schizophrenia based on one episode, one bad week after my daughter died, and you never looked deeper. Never ran the tests that would have shown it was Hashimoto's encephalopathy. treatable. Curable. But you were so convinced, so arrogant. I followed standard diagnostic procedures. He moved around the desk, putting distance between us. His hand drifted toward the phone. You exhibited clear psychotic symptoms. Hallucinations, paranoid delusions. I was grieving. I was sick. My thyroid antibodies were attacking my brain, but you never checked. You just saw a black woman having a breakdown and decided you knew what it was. I pulled out the third envelope, threw it at him. The papers hit his chest and tumbled to the floor. How many others? How many people did you misdiagnose because you were too lazy or too proud to consider alternatives? He jabbed at the phone buttons. Security. I need security in my office immediately. I grabbed the edge of his desk and shoved. The whole massive piece of furniture shifted 6 inches, computer monitor tilting dangerously. Pens and papers avalanched onto the floor. Dr. Elwood stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the wall of diplomas. One frame crashed down, glass shattering across the carpet. 10 years, I said, advancing on him. 10 years of medications that made me shake, made me gain 60 pounds, killed my personality. 10 years of people looking at me like I was broken, dangerous. My son wouldn't let me near my grandchildren because you convinced everyone I was schizophrenic. And all of it was wrong. His back pressed against the wall. For the first time in all our sessions, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, not the careful clinical assessment he'd always worn like armor. You can't prove. I can prove everything. I yanked the final envelope from my bag. Current labs, current diagnosis from 3 independent specialists. Hashimoto's encephalopathy, now in remission because I'm finally on the right treatment. The treatment I should have gotten a decade ago if you'd done your job. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. The door burst open and 2 security guards rushed in, hands on their belts where pepper spray canisters hung. A nurse appeared behind them, eyes wide. I didn't move, didn't run. Just stood there with the evidence scattered across the floor around me, my chest heaving, watching Dr. Robert Elwood shrink against his wall of lies. Generated story, block 910. The larger guard grabbed my arm, fingers digging into my bicep. I let him pull me backward 3 steps, my shoes crunching on broken glass. The evidence papers lay scattered across the carpet like fallen leaves. Lab results, specialist reports, the documented timeline of my stolen decade. Dr. Elwood's face had gone chalk white, his hand trembling as he straightened his glasses. She assaulted me, he said, voice thin and reedy. You both saw the damage. I twisted against the guard's grip, not to escape, but to face him directly. Call the police then, please. I want this on record. The second guard, younger with a military haircut, bent to pick up one of the documents. His eyes scanned the page, brow furrowing. He looked up at Dr. Elwood, then at me, then back at the paper in his hands. This says misdiagnosis, the young guard said slowly. I wrenched my arm free and stepped forward. The older guard reached for me again, but I held up both palms, showing I meant no more violence. My heart hammered against my ribs, adrenaline making my fingers tingle. The destroyed office surrounded us, overturned desk, shattered frames, papers everywhere. 10 years of rage had exploded in 30 seconds. Keep her away from me, Dr. Elwood said, straightening his tie with shaking hands. Janet, call hospital administration. I want charges filed immediately. The nurse nodded and disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps rapid on the linoleum. I took a long breath, forcing my shoulders down, making myself stand still despite every muscle screaming to keep moving, keep fighting. The young guard still held the document, his eyes moving over the words. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the older guard said, but his tone had shifted. Not aggressive anymore. Uncertain. I gathered the nearest papers, moving deliberately, showing no threat. My hands only trembled slightly as I collected each piece of evidence. The guards watched, but didn't stop me. Dr. Elwood stayed pressed against the wall, one hand protectively covering his chest. "I spent 3 years thinking I was seeing demons," I said, not looking at him. "The medications you prescribed made the hallucinations worse because they were never hallucinations. They were autoimmune encephalopathy, inflammation attacking my brain, treatable, curable. But you never ran the right tests." I stacked the papers, tapping them against my thigh to align the edges. My movements were controlled now, precise. The storm had passed through me, leaving only cold clarity behind. "You can't prove I did anything wrong," Dr. Elwood said. "Psychiatric diagnosis is subjective. I made clinical judgments based on your presentation." The young guard set down the paper he'd been reading. "Says here 3 other doctors all agreed it wasn't psychiatric. Says the antibody tests came back positive once someone finally ordered them." I looked at Dr. Elwood directly, holding his gaze. He tried to maintain his professional mask, but I saw the cracks forming. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the door. Sweat beaded along his hairline. "My lawyer has copies of everything," I said. "The state medical board will receive a formal complaint by end of business today. So will your malpractice insurance carrier. And I've contacted 7 other patients you diagnosed with treatment-resistant schizophrenia, who never responded to antipsychotics." His face drained of remaining color. "That's confidential patient information? They contacted me through the support group I started 3 months ago for people misdiagnosed with psychiatric conditions." I slid the papers into my bag, zipping it closed with deliberate care. "Turns out, when you finally get the right diagnosis and start talking publicly about it, others find you. 5 of them are getting retested right now. The other 2 already confirmed autoimmune disorders." Footsteps approached again, multiple pairs. Janet returned with 2 men in suits, hospital administration badges clipped to their pockets. Behind them came a woman I recognized from the legal department. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes went immediately to the destroyed office, cataloging damage. "Mrs. James?" the taller administrator said. He was mid-40s, graying at the temples, and carried a tablet. "I'm Paul Hendricks, VP of Patient Services. We need to discuss this situation." "Dawn," I said. "Just Dawn. And yes, we do need to discuss it. Starting with how your hospital employed a psychiatrist who never ordered standard autoimmune panels for patients presenting with sudden onset psychosis." Paul Hendricks's jaw tightened. He looked at Dr. Elwood, then at the papers still scattered across the floor. The legal representative had already crouched down, picking up documents and reading them with increasingly concerned eyes. "Security, please escort Mrs. James to conference room B," Hendricks said. "Dr. Elwood, you'll need to come to my office." The guards moved toward me, but I was already walking. I held my head high, shoulders back, moving through the doorway into the harsh, fluorescent hallway. Behind me, I heard Dr. Elwood starting to protest, his voice rising in pitch. The sound followed me down the corridor. The sound of a man realizing his carefully constructed authority was crumbling. My hands had stopped shaking entirely. Each step felt solid, purposeful. The destroyed office, the confrontation, the rage, it had all been necessary. 10 years of my life stolen, but I'd finally stopped accepting their version of my story. The truth was documented now, witnessed, impossible to ignore. The conference room door opened ahead. I walked through it, ready for whatever came next. Story block 1010. The morning sun caught the glass panels of the community center, casting prisms across the parking lot. I pulled into my usual spot, gathering the stack of manila folders from the passenger seat. 6 months since that confrontation, and the weight of those folders felt different now, purposeful instead of suffocating. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with lemon floor polish. My sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as I made my way to the meeting room. Chairs formed a circle, 12 of them, and I began arranging information packets on each seat. Lupus support group materials, autoimmune disease awareness pamphlets, contact information for medical advocacy services. "You're early again," said Keisha, the center coordinator, poking her head through the doorway. She was 20-something, always wore bright scarves, always smiled like she meant it. "Old habit." I smoothed down a wrinkled corner on one of the pamphlets. The settlement money from Mercy General had been substantial, enough to stop working the overnight shifts at the warehouse, enough to fund this group for 2 years. Dr. Elwood had lost his license. Paul Hendricks had resigned. The hospital's patient review board was reassessing every psychiatric diagnosis he'd made over the past decade. But those victories felt distant now, abstract. What mattered was this room, these chairs, the people who would fill them. At 10 o'clock, they started arriving. First came Tamara, mid-30s, recently diagnosed after 5 years of being told her joint pain was psychosomatic. She still walked with a slight limp, still flinched when shaking hands too firmly. Behind her, Miguel shuffled in, gray-haired and stooped, carrying the weight of a misdiagnosis that had stolen his 60s. I watched them take seats, watched them glance nervously at each other, and then at me. Their eyes held the same haunted quality I'd seen in my own mirror for years, the look of people who'd been gaslit by the very system meant to heal them. "Let's begin," I said, settling into my own chair. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Stories spilled out, years lost to wrong medications, relationships destroyed by symptoms no one believed, careers abandoned because doctors insisted it was all mental. I listened, took notes, offered resources. Afterward, Tamara approached me, clutching a tissue in one trembling hand. "How did you do it?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "How did you fight back?" I thought about that destroyed office, the scattered papers, the rage that had driven me to Mercy General that day. But what I said was simpler. One step at a time, and knowing I wasn't alone. She nodded, squeezed my hand, and left. By noon, the center had emptied. I locked up the meeting room and headed to my car, but instead of driving home, I turned toward the park downtown. The afternoon stretched ahead with no obligations, no time clock to punch, no supervisor watching my every move. The park's walking trail wound through oak trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead. I joined the flow of joggers and dog walkers, finding my rhythm, feeling my muscles work without pain for the first time in over a decade. The hydroxychloroquine had finally stabilized my symptoms. Regular blood work confirmed my lupus was managed, controlled, no longer the mysterious beast ravaging my body, while doctors called me delusional. A young mother pushed a stroller past me, her toddler pointing excitedly at a squirrel. The ordinary beauty of it, the simple, unburdened normalcy, made my throat tight. 3 miles later, I circled back to the parking lot, breathing hard but steady. My phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. "New member wants to join next week. Woman, 48, misdiagnosed bipolar for 6 years, actually has MS." I typed back, "Send her my number." The afternoon shifted into evening. At home, I made dinner. Real cooking, not the frozen meals I'd survived on during the warehouse years. Chicken roasted with lemon and thyme. Fresh green beans sautéed in garlic. I set one place at the table, lit a candle, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. Afterward, I spread out on the couch with my laptop. The patient advocacy blog I'd started had grown to 3,000 followers. Tonight's post would be about medical gaslighting, about trusting your own body even when everyone in a white coat insists you're wrong. My fingers moved across the keyboard, the words flowing easier now, no longer choked by rage or grief, just truth, simple and clear. At midnight, I finally closed the laptop and moved to the bedroom. The prescription bottles on my nightstand were different now, actual treatments for actual conditions, not antipsychotics that had dulled my mind while my body continued its slow collapse. I swallowed the evening dose, brushed my teeth, and slid between clean sheets. Sleep came easier these days. No nightmares about locked wards or doctors with condescending smiles. Just darkness, rest, and the knowledge that tomorrow I'd wake up and continue building this new life from the ruins of the old one. The stolen decade would never return. But the years ahead belong to me now, every single one of them. Did you like this? What's your location? Comment below. Your super thanks support matters. Hit that subscribe button. Until next time.